All right, so now that we've got chords, drums, and an 808 bass line, let's add a melody on top. So the same way we actually used a sample for that 808 bass line, we're gonna do the same thing for the melody. So let's first go to instruments again, and remember we wanna use simpler. And since we don't have any tracks left, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all used up, we just drag simpler into this empty space and it gives us a 5th track. Now we can navigate back to the pack and let's take a look at the samples. We don't want any drum hits. We actually want some melodic one-shots. Let's check it out. Let's see what they have for synth shots. Cool. Let's turn these into instruments. We're going to start with this synth sample. It sounds a little bit harsh at first, but I think we can get it to work. Now, we do need to check this out because it does say G in the title, which is a giveaway that it might not be the right note. C might not be lining up with C on our keyboard or what we're hearing. So again, we go to audio effects and grab the tuner. And lo and behold, the title is correct. It is a G, but I'm playing a C on the keyboard. So let's go to controls. Remember that this ST stands for semitones. So if we're at G, we need to actually go down quite a bit. How many semitones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 semitones. Remember that the other word for these is half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 semitones are 7 half steps. We're going down, so we're going to type -7. Boom, hit enter, and we have a C. Awesome. So now we have this kind of harsh sounding synth. Let's take a look back at the sample controls here. Now in Simpler, we can adjust how the sample sounds on occasion, like the attack, which we talked about earlier. Remember that we hear immediately the start of that sound, but if we turn up the attack, we'll start to get a little bit of a fade, which is a little bit less harsh. Also notice that when I release the key, the sound instantly ends, which we can adjust by turning up the release. Another thing to keep in mind too is that since this is a sample, when I play a lower note, like way down here, the sample is much longer because I'm playing it lower. When I play higher, the sample becomes much shorter. You can see the speed at which Simpler plays through that high note versus this low note. Look how slow that line goes across. If I want that to be semi-uniform across the octaves of the keyboard, I can go ahead and warp the sample, but I need to select probably a different warp mode. Let's go with tones. Notice we get some artifacts in there, which if you're going for a lo-fi sound, that's pretty good. I often find Complex Pro to be one of the best warping modes, but I could survive with tones as well, especially for a lo-fi sounding sound like that. Let's go ahead and keep it on Complex Pro. And we can add audio effects to any of our sounds in our session, but let's focus on adding some audio effects to this lead sound. Specifically, let's go ahead and add some reverb. You'll notice that I just clicked on reverb and dragged it in there. That's the base stock reverb within Ableton Live. Let me delete that real quick. If I open up this folder, you'll see that we get a host of cool presets. Let's try Cathedral. Something to notice here as well is we're getting 100% of the reverb. We lost all of the original synth, and that's because the dry wet is turned up to 100%. Most effects have a dry wet knob, and 100% represents that we're hearing 100% of a reverberated signal. If we pull it back to 0, we're only hearing the original synth. The original sample, I should say. We put it at 50%, we get the best of both worlds. But this is something that you can experiment with. Maybe you want it to be 79%. So a lot of the reverb and not a lot of the original sound. which I might go with here actually. Another common way we adjust the way things sound is by using an EQ. And Ableton Live Lite here comes with EQ3 as well as channel EQ. Let's go ahead and throw channel EQ on here. Also notice that I put it before the reverb, which the order in which these effects go is important, because if I EQ the sound and then it goes through the reverb will be reverberating on the sound that's already been EQ'd. Meanwhile, if I put the EQ here, I'll actually be EQing the sound of the whole sample and the reverb. And I want to adjust it before the reverb. So we can adjust things like bringing down the lows of a sound. Let's hear what this sounds like with the lows all the way down. Bring it down. We lose a lot of that bassiness, which I'm okay with because we've actually already got an 808 and we don't want it to clash. The mid-range, which some associate with a little bit of a nasally kind of sound. We can roll off some of those mids for sure, bring them down. And we could brighten it by raising the highs. You can hear a lot more of that brightness. Bring it down. It becomes much darker. This is to your taste, of course, but I'm going to give it a bright high end. We've brought out some of the low end and a little bit of a dip in the mid-range. And I think that maybe it's a little too much reverb at this point, so I'm going to bring the dry wet down. So now we've created our melodic sound, it's time to actually come up with a melody. Let's go ahead and play the loops that we already have going. And probably one of the easiest ways to approach this is to just start improvising over this loop. Less is more, especially when you're a beginner and you're just starting out. And also remembering that we're playing in C major today, so all of the white keys are fair game. Try to avoid any of the black keys. Find notes that sound good. The same way that we used the chord progression to find notes for our bass line, we can do a similar thing with melody. And it's not as simple as just holding down the bass note of each of these chords, but it's pretty safe to say that if there's a note in this chord, it'll sound good in the melody over that chord. So A, C, E, right? Followed by E, G, B. Let's go ahead and play those notes over the chord progressions. And I'm only going to play notes that are within the chords as we pass through them. That sounds okay. And if you experiment with playing the notes in different octaves and in different orders, not just in the same order they are played in the chord from the bottom up, you can actually probably come up with something really good. Let's try this approach. I'm going to go ahead and record. Alright, so let's look at this very simple melody. Remember that if you ever get lost in terms of rhythm, you can turn the metronome back on so you can hear those solid beats, but I'm also listening to the hi-hats and the drums that we've already got laid out. And you'll notice that things are already falling onto the grid and everything is playing within time. I am running that clock in my head of counting. And 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 4 E and a. So let's examine this a bit more. We have the opening phrase, This is the call, and then we have the second phrase. We'll call that the response. We'll do another call and response. Here's the response. Notice that I did deviate slightly at the end there, and that's okay. This G is not in that initial chord that's happening there on bar 4. However, it does fit the melody. Keep an eye on the shape of the melody, so you'll see that we repeat the same shapes. And then an ascending shape. And then our shape right here matches shape at bar 3. And then this ascending shape matches our shape in bar 4. So having common things like that, whether it's the shape of the melody or the pattern of the call and response, is what makes a melody catchy and memorable. Let's come up with one more melody so we have a little room for variety when we do arrangement later. Let's go ahead and record another 4-bar loop. And I'll record it up an octave. Cool. Make sure that's quantized. There's one more layer of effect I would like to add onto this melody, and it's delay. Now, instead of adding a delay onto the track, which I totally could, I could go to Audio Effects and bring a delay, drop it in here. Instead, I want to use these send knobs right here, which control a reverb and delay that comes just stock in this Ableton Live template. Let me demonstrate for you how this works and how this is different than putting an audio effect right on the track. Let's take this hi-hat loop, for instance. I'm going to solo it. This hi-hat loop has no effects on it at all. But say I added a reverb to it. Suddenly, we're hearing 55% of the reverb and then the remaining percentage of dry hi-hat. But no matter what, we're getting only an affected version of this hi-hat sound. If I turn it up to 100%, we get only the reverberated signal. But no matter what, I'm losing a percentage of that dry sound. Let me turn that reverb off. If I use the send knob here, send A, which controls A, this reverb here, if I crank that up, I still get, I'm still hearing the dry version of this track, but there's also a track of reverb playing with it. So no matter what, I'm still listening to the dry hi-hat track. And I'm also getting a reverb signal. So with using sends, you maintain the original sound while also getting an effect on top. When adding an effect directly to a sound, you're losing some of that original sound. So let's go ahead and add some delay, which is on send B here, to our lead instrument. We're getting that little bit of an echo kind of sound, right? We're hearing notes repeated. And these effects can be edited too. You just have to click on a reverb and you can change what kind of reverb it is. Same for the delay, you can change the timing of it. Let's actually switch this delay to be a 3/2 pattern. And let's turn it to a ping pong delay. It'll bounce between our ears now. very, very floaty. I'm going to bring the volume of it down a little bit. And there we have it, a melody on top of our beat. So now that we have all of our key parts, we're actually going to jump into mixing and arranging our track. So I can show you how you can finish your track, export them, share them with your friends, or put them online.